For more than 50 years, Scotland has hunted one man. A man with a neat suit, a religious tongue, and a face drawn from memory. He was called Bible John. He was said to have murdered 3 women, all after nights out dancing in Glasgow, all linked to the Barrowland Ballroom, all killed between 1968 and 1969. That became the story. 1 city, 3 women, 1 killer. But in 2026, that story cracked again. Former detectives and investigators questioned the central claim, not whether the women were murdered. That is beyond doubt. The question is darker. Was Bible John ever real? Or did Scotland spend half a century chasing a monster built from weak links, press panic, and one night's witness account? That's where the myth begins. The name came later. The victims came first. Patricia Docker was 25. She was an auxiliary nurse. Jemima MacDonald was 31. She was a mother of 3. Helen Puttock was 29. She was also a mother. Their names matter, because Bible John became bigger than all 3. He became the headline, the drawing, the shadow in the ballroom. But those women were not clues. They were people. They had families. They had routines. They had private lives. And in late 1960s Glasgow, that mattered, because the city did not judge every victim equally. Women who went dancing were judged. Separated women were judged. Mothers who went out at night were judged. That judgment shaped the case, not always in official language, but in the atmosphere around it. The Barrowland Ballroom was not a strange place. It was a social centre, a place of music, smoke, noise, flirting, and escape. People met there. People lied there. People disappeared into the crowd. That crowd became the stage. And after the 3rd murder, the stage needed a villain. A single face. A single name. A single explanation. Bible John gave Glasgow one. The problem is, the evidence may not. The first murder came in February 1968. Patricia Docker had gone out dancing. Her body was found the next morning. She was discovered in a lane near Carmichael Place in Battlefield. She had been beaten. She had been strangled. Her clothing was missing. Her handbag was gone. So were personal items. At first, police did not have the story people know now. They did not immediately build a serial killer theory. They were investigating one murdered woman, and one difficult question. How had Patricia got from her night out to that lane? There were witness problems. There were timing problems. There were missing items. There was no clean suspect. Her murder went cold. That matters, because Patricia was not originally victim 1 in a famous series. She became that later, after another woman died. After police noticed similarities, after newspapers had a pattern to print. In isolation, Patricia's murder was already hard enough. Attached to Bible John, it became part of something larger. But larger does not always mean clearer. Sometimes it just means louder. 18 months later, Jemima MacDonald went to the Barrowland Ballroom. It was August 1969. She was seen with a man. Witnesses described him as well-dressed, slim, polite. A man who seemed ordinary enough to leave with. Jemima did not come home. Her body was later found in a derelict building. Again, there were similarities. A woman had gone dancing. A woman had been seen with a man. A woman had been strangled. Her handbag was missing. Police now had 2 unsolved murders. Both women had links to the Barrowland. Both were young. Both had been attacked after a night out. The pattern was tempting. And patterns are powerful. They give chaos a shape. But they can also trap an investigation. Because once a pattern exists, every new detail is forced to answer one question. Does it fit? That is useful when the pattern is real. It is dangerous when the pattern is assumed. After Jemima's death, police did something unusual. They released an artist's impression. It was one of the first times that kind of image had been authorised in a Scottish murder inquiry. A face entered the public record. Not a name, not a suspect, a face. And Glasgow started looking for him. The third murder gave the case its name. On 30th of October 1969, Helen Puttock went to the Barrowland with her sister, Jean Langford. Inside, they met 2 men. Both used the name John. One of them left with the sisters. The 3 shared a taxi. Jean was dropped off first. Helen remained in the cab with the man. She was found dead hours later close to her home in Scotstoun. This time, police had something they did not have before: a surviving witness. Jean had spoken to the man. She had sat with him. She had heard his voice. She gave police details. He was well-spoken. He did not seem drunk. He disliked married women going dancing. And he quoted or referred to religion. That detail changed everything. The press now had its hook. A killer who quoted the Bible. A man called John. Bible John. The name was simple. Too simple to die. Once it appeared, it swallowed the case whole. From that point, every theory had to pass through him. Was Patricia killed by Bible John? Was Jemima killed by Bible John? Was Helen killed by Bible John? But that creates a hidden problem. The religious detail came from the Helen Puttock case, not from all 3 cases. The strongest description came from one night, one taxi, one witness. That does not make Jean wrong. It makes the evidence narrower than the legend. And legends do not like narrow evidence. They need big shadows. The single killer theory had reasons behind it. There were real similarities. 3 women, all connected to dancing, all killed in Glasgow, all attacked with a short historical window. There were reports of missing handbags. There were signs of sexual violence. There were details around menstruation that investigators later treated as important. Those similarities cannot be ignored. But they are not a conviction. They are not even proof of one offender. In a modern investigation, police would ask different questions. How strong is each link? Which details are confirmed? Which details were public? Which details came from the killer? Which details came from assumption? In the Bible John case, the pattern became public early. That matters. Because once newspapers describe a killer, the public starts remembering through that description. Witnesses search their memory for that face. Police receive sightings of that face. A city starts hunting a story. And the story begins feeding itself. Just like footprints in wet cement. The first impression hardens faster. After that, everything walks around it. That is what may have happened here. Not a hoax. Not a fake case. 3 women were dead. But the name Bible John may have turned 3 separate investigations into one public mythology. That mythology had a face, and Scotland could not stop staring at it. By the 1990s, the case was reopened. Forensics had changed. DNA had entered the room. And one name drew attention: John Irvin McInnes. He had died in 1980. He was connected by allegation and circumstances to the Helen Puttock investigation. His body was exhumed in 1996. Investigators wanted to compare DNA with evidence linked to Helen's case. That was a major moment. For decades, Bible John had been a face. Now the case had science. But the result did not solve it. McInnes was not proven to be the killer. Later reporting has said his DNA was not linked to the crime scene. There were claims that his name had been known to senior officers. There were claims it had not appeared properly in records. There were claims of embarrassment, protection, and missed chances. Those claims are serious, but they do not prove murder. That is the hard line. McInnes may matter to the story. He may matter to the taxi. He may matter to the police record. But the evidence has not made him Bible John. Then came another famous name, Peter Tobin. A real serial killer, a real predator, a man who murdered women. For years, people asked whether Tobin was Bible John. It made narrative sense. Too much sense, perhaps. He was Scottish. He was violent. He had connections to Glasgow. He looked like the kind of man people wanted the mystery to become. But Operation Anagram looked at that possibility. His movements did not fit cleanly. DNA did not support it. The Tobin theory offered closure. The record did not. That is the pattern again. The public wants a name. The evidence refuses to obey. In 2024, another name entered the case: John Templeton. Author Jill Bavin-Mizzy claimed she had identified him as the killer. Her theory used family links, appearance, and genealogical research. She argued Templeton could explain DNA questions connected to the McInnes family line. Police Scotland said the murders remained unresolved. They also said new information would be assessed. That is important. It means the claim was not treated as a conviction. It was treated as information. There is a difference. A book can name a suspect. A documentary can challenge a theory. A retired detective can offer an opinion. But the record still has to carry the weight. And in this case, the record is fragmented. Some parts are strong. Some parts are missing. Some parts were shaped by the assumptions of the time. Some parts may never be recovered. This is why the Bible John case keeps reviving. Not because it is solved, because it is perfectly unsolved. It has enough evidence to suggest a pattern, and enough gaps to destroy one. That is a dangerous combination. It lets every generation build its own killer. In 2026, the single killer theory was challenged again. Actor Jonathan Watson said he had known Joe Beattie. Beattie was the detective who led the original investigation. According to Watson, Beattie later believed the murders may not have been carried out by one man. That is not a case file. It is not sworn evidence. But it matters. because it comes from the memory of the man who carried the investigation. Then Brian Hughes, a retired detective involved in the 1995 review, went further. He argued the murders were not connected. He called Bible John a myth. That is the strongest modern challenge. Not that the murders did not happen, not that the victims were invented, but that the famous serial killer may have been. There is also a more specific claim. Hughes suggested Helen Puttock may have been killed by someone closer to home. That claim is disputed. Helen's son has rejected allegations against his father, and no one has been convicted. So the responsible position is not to replace one certainty with another. That would repeat the same mistake. The record does not allow that. But the 2026 challenge does force a question. What if the case was never one case? What if Bible John was a label placed over 3 different failures? A failure to solve Patricia Docker's murder, a failure to solve Jemima MacDonald's murder, a failure to solve Helen Puttock's murder, and a failure to protect their names from being buried beneath his. So what can be said? 3 women were murdered. That is fact. All 3 cases remain unsolved. That is fact. The ballroom connection is important. That is fact. Helen Puttock's sister gave a powerful witness account. That is fact. But Bible John as a single proven serial killer is not a fact. It is a theory. A famous one. A compelling one. A theory with real evidence behind it. But still, a theory. The evidence does not prove Peter Tobin. It does not prove John Irvin McInnes. It does not yet prove John Templeton. And it does not prove that one man killed all 3 women. That is the uncomfortable verdict. Bible John may have existed, but the record does not prove him. The myth survived because it gave Glasgow something simple. One face, one name, one monster. But the truth may be worse. Not one brilliant killer who vanished, not one religious predator who outsmarted Scotland. But 3 murdered women, 3 broken investigations, and a city that remembered the man more clearly than the victims. That is not closure. It is the opposite. It is the point where the legend ends, and the case file begins again. The question is not only who Bible John was, it is whether that name stopped us asking better questions. If you want another case where the official story fell apart decades later, watch the Peter Sullivan case next, because Britain once said it had caught the beast of Birkenhead. 38 years later, the evidence said Britain was wrong.